Joining us now is Stephen Yates. He's a former Deputy Assistant for National Security Affairs to Vice President Dick Cheney. Mr. Yates, welcome. Thanks for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you very much, Eric.
So the UN, 6 years ago, said stop enriching uranium. The Iranians totally ignore that. And now we have a potential plan from the administration that would allow them to do that?
Right. Unfortunately, this kind of idea has been tried repeatedly throughout negotiations with Iran, dating back to times when the EU3 were negotiating during the Bush administration to the present, when the permanent 5 members of the UN Security Council plus Germany have been negotiating with the administration's consent on Iran issues. I think it's an unfortunate concession, one that is entirely implausible in a sense of moving Iran off the path toward pursuing the ultimate weapons capability.
Now, you know, Iran, of course, they say under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, it's their right to have nuclear energy, to have nuclear facilities for medical purposes, and they would be saying, well, this 5% is just for that, not for a bomb.
Well, fair enough. I think the terms of the Non-Proliferation Treaty do say things along those lines, but I think a point often overlooked in that is those terms are to be available to those who abide by the rules. One of the key tests of the non-proliferation regime in the last decade is how to deal with violators who game the system deliberately to enrich uranium up to that point and then break out. Iran is currently in possession of uranium enriched beyond that 5% mark, and we have uncharted territory in terms of how we would get that out of Iran and enforceably verify an agreement.
Yeah, they've enriched up to 20%. So for all of us that are not nuclear scientists and don't understand what that means, what does it mean? If they're at 20%, you need, what, 90% for a bomb? I mean, can you have a bomb at 20%?
Well, according to scientists, no, but there's a much shorter path when you have more highly enriched uranium to reach that ultimate ability. And of course, we're going based on what we know. If you're dealing with a country who has not subjected itself ever to complete verifiable SNAP inspections, which we can't possibly cover 100%, how much faith can you have in a decades-long violator abiding by this agreement and not having another facility going beyond that 5%?
I mean, would this be kind of like do you think it's a shell game, you know, if they say, okay, we'll let you have 5% if you let us inspect all your facilities? I mean, at bottom line, you know, what would that mean?
My sense is what the administration seeks, and probably what multiple parties in this seek, is to buy time. Buy time past the election, buy time, and perhaps they have faith that biting sanctions will take effect. But in reality, the Iranians are looking at an administration that just offered North Korea food assistance in exchange for resumption of talks, only to have the North Koreans launch a test missile soon thereafter. I just don't think right now the Iranians fear that they're in any jeopardy violating any terms. And so, yes, let's have talks, buy time, and they'll improve their capability in the meantime.
Yeah, you know, they keep on, they're full of bluster. They cut some of the oil exports, and yet they still keep on going, and they say that they have a nuclear program that is their right. So how do we stop them? What does happen? Will it take a military strike that some don't want from perhaps Israel to get them to get back to the table and talk beyond what's happened in Istanbul, or what may happen in the next talks in Baghdad?
Unfortunately, I don't see any risk-free options on the table. We're very far down the path with Iran. To have true denuclearization, I do believe all options have to be credible, including that of a military attack, whether by Israel or anyone else. At the moment, I just don't believe the Iranians think that the threat of military attack is credible. There also ought to be numerous other options that would more forcefully undermine the legitimacy of the regime, make it feel like really their only path forward to stay in power and to keep a viable government in place is to truly denuclearize. And we're just not at that point, even close to it.
All right, quickly, what other options would you suggest that aren't being tried right now?
Well, there are a whole range of options that would be political in nature, that would be enabling those who, say, a couple of years ago rose up against the regime, creating viable alternatives in Iran, making it so that they had to struggle to survive there, I think could perhaps move them away from this focus on nuclear capabilities.
Well, they haven't listened so far, apparently. They've been violating 6 UN resolutions, and it continues. Stephen Yates from Salt Lake City this afternoon, thank you for joining us here on the Fox News Channel.
Thank you, Eric.
All right, well, President Obama